right, good friends, good evening and welcome. This is INN World Report Radio time here on the great Logos Radio Network. Sorry about the long intro tonight, but we had a little bit of last-minute adjustments we were making, but with good reason. And, well, let me just continue. My name is Tom Kiley, and welcome to the program. If I seem a little bit rushed, it's because we're going to get right into it. We will be joined momentarily by Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley, who has not been on the show for some time. At least, certainly not since the coup d'état that happened in the Ukraine that removed a democratically elected government with a bunch of thugs backed up by apparently by the U.S. State Department. And you know Webster's going to have a lot to say about that, and he has been saying a lot about it. But I feel I owe it to the INN World Report listening audience to bring him here on this show so we can speak with him directly. It is, after all, an evolving situation. You are being given lots and lots and lots of official United States government propaganda on this. The very terms in which a lot of these events are being couched are loaded terms, are terms that are counting on the fact that you probably don't know that much about the region and what goes on there. For instance, that you don't know about the fact that the Crimean Peninsula was a part of Russia for most of the last 300 years or so, and that the Soviet Union gave the Crimea back to the Ukraine as an autonomous region back in the 1950s, I believe. And that most of the people there are ethnically Russian, speak Russian, and they don't want to have any part of this coup that happened. And so they voted to return to Mother Russia. Now, with a democratically elected referendum that was approved by something like 96%. Now, hold on to your children, because the warmongers in Washington have taken those events that I just described and have described it as Russia's grab of the Ukraine. Okay, Russia moves into the Ukraine. Russia takes the Ukraine. That's absolutely not true. The people there voted to rejoin Russia. Now, if the United States government's going to recognize as legitimate the illegitimate government in the Ukraine, which came into power without an election, how can they then tell us the desire of the people of the autonomous region of the Crimea, who have voted democratically to quit that illegitimate government? How can they tell us that was not legitimate? Anyway, those are the kind of things that we're going to be talking about when Webster joins us on the program tonight. I got a news flash from him, actually, an email from him this afternoon. As is typically the case when you have a putsch, that's the German term for it, for a coup. Oftentimes you're using guerrillas or, brown shirts, as they were called, the SA in Germany, the thugs that break heads and kill people and get rid of anybody who is in the way of the fascists that they are putting into power. But once the fascists achieve power, a lot of times these guys are no longer necessary, or in fact even a detriment, because they draw a lot of unwanted criticism and attention, and they're killed. And that's what happened in Nazi Germany. They called it the Night of the Long Knives, where Hitler's inner circle decided that they could no longer control these thugs, and that these thugs were, like true believers, who thought that they could run the show. So there was what they call the Night of the Long Knives. Well, there's evidence that maybe that's happening now. But you know what? Why should we talk about it in these terms when Dr. Tarpley is with us? Let's go live now. Good evening, Webster. Are you there?
Hello, Tom. How are you?
I'm fine, Webster, and it's been long overdue. We've been curious to hear what you have to say about this putsch in the Ukraine. What are you covering? What are you focusing on these days as far as that goes?
Well, first of all, the parallel that you've just mentioned, I think, is very important. The so-called Night of the Long Knives. Maybe people need to look back at the history of the Third Reich and Hitler and the Nazis. If you remember that the brown shirts, the so-called stormtroopers or Sturmabteilungen, were the way that Hitler bashed his way to power in Germany by, clearing the streets of communists and workers and unions and social democrats or any other party, and that this was a group of thugs and criminal types, sociopaths, deviant personalities of all sorts. And that was called the SA, the Sturmabteilung. And there were a lot of people in the SA, notably their leader, a guy called Ernst Röhm, Roehm, who were talking about a second revolution. After Hitler seized power in January 1933, the SA wanted a second revolution. And the second revolution was, we're now going to kick out the heads of the banks, the companies, and the army, and we're going to take those jobs for ourselves. And Hitler felt that he wanted to keep the officer corps and the top industrialists and bankers on his side, and that he couldn't allow this second revolution. So he arranged for the murder, right, the machine gunning in many cases of the top leaders of the SA, including Röhm himself and a number of other people that Hitler wanted to get rid of. And that happened in July of 1934, so about a year and a half after the original seizure of power. And that seems to be what we've got going on already in Ukraine with the killing of this guy Muzychko. Muzychko is a well-known Nazi thug, and you may have seen him on television. He goes into government offices, beats up government officials, state prosecutors. His thugs have gone into the office of the head of the national television and beat him up and forced him to resign because he put Putin's speech on television. This Muzychko, by the way, is somebody who went to Chechnya in the 1990s and joined with the Chechen terrorists, right? The guys who blew up the Boston Marathon, paid for by Saudi Arabia, but they were killing Russians. And Muzychko thought that if they were killing Russians, then he had to go there, and he's accused of actually killing 10 or 20 Russian soldiers who were prisoners of war back there in the 1990s. So this character is a monster, and he'd been running wild, and he'd been getting a lot of international attention. And he was just, according to most accounts, he was just killed today. And he was, of course, an important leader of the so-called right sector. And the right sector was the Nazi fascist organization, which was the leading force in this Maidan, right? This public square that was occupied in the middle of Kiev by these street fighters and thugs most of the time. This guy Muzychko has just been killed, and there's still a member of that party, right sector. There's a presidential candidate who is also in the government. This character Yarosh, who is saying that the murder of that Muzychko's death was a murder, not a police operation, and that it was ordered by the interior minister. And the interior minister comes from the Fatherland Party. In other words, the Yulia Tymoshenko Party. Maybe I just sketch this for a second. The people who now have power in Kiev are a group of kleptocrats and oligarchs oriented towards the IMF and the European Central Bank and the European Commission, right, the so-called Troika. And they are grouped around this awful woman, Yulia Tymoshenko, the gas princess, who is thought to be the richest and most successful oligarch of them all. And she was installed in power in 2004 by the Orange Revolution, a classic U.S.-backed CIA color revolution, masterminded in large part by the Brzezinski family, right? Zbigniew Brzezinski was the leading organizer, and his son Ian at that time. So Yulia Tymoshenko was the prime minister from 2004 to until about 2010, and she was then put in jail with good reason, because she was one of the most picaresque thieves that we've ever seen. That party is the Fatherland Party, and they're the big winners in terms of the posts, right? The president, the so-called president of Ukraine, installed by this putsch, as you say, is this Turchinov, and he's from the Fatherland Party, and the Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, this banker, and presumably a Scientologist also, but they simply represent the international bankers. These are the apostles of austerity and looting and having the U.S. and the European Union buy up the tremendously valuable Ukrainian Black Earth region and all sorts of other things that they want to loot. But you have that group. Those guys generally are in suits. Then you've got this sort of respectable fascist party. How can I say it? Not respectable, but they're not exactly the street hooligan type, right? These guys also appear in business suits, or can at least, and that's Tjanibok and his group. They're the so-called Svoboda Party. But, of course, the Svoboda Party grows out of the Social National Party, or National Socialist Party of Ukraine, and they are the direct descendants of the SS, the German Nazi SS division called the Galicia Division, which was created to fight along with the Wehrmacht against the Red Army back in World War II. And they are especially fans of a guy called Stepan Bandera, Bandera being the leading Nazi collaborator of Ukraine during those years.
And somebody they've been trying to refurbish his image, even though he's been declared a war criminal, I guess, by the UN. Webster, hold on right there, because we have to take a break. Friends, Webster Griffin Tarpley on the show, and as you can hear already, we're getting a very, very fine roundup of what's really going on in the Ukraine. We'll be right back with them just after this. All right, good friends. Welcome back, Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio. Let's get right back to it. Dr. Webster Tarpley on the line with us. Dr. Tarpley, apparently this never-ending war on terror isn't enough for these neocons. They want to revive the Cold War as well. And but why don't we get back to it? You were giving us a little bit of the history and some of these players.
You're certainly right. The neocons, especially William Crystal, right? They're of course reviled and hated and execrated by the American people. Right? This plague, this I don't know what. They've inflicted these useless wars on the American people, right? Their hands are dripping with blood. They're the architects of national decline, and all they can do as one-trick ponies is to propose more war. In the past, the neocon virtue in the past was they would only want to pick on defenseless countries, right? Countries that were essentially unable to defend themselves. Now they're messing with Russia. This is very different. People should have no doubt. Russia can blow your head off any time. So don't mess with Russia. It makes no sense. You treat Russia like a banana republic. It's a nuclear banana. So be very careful, right? And it's time to run a few neocons out of town on a rail, or to reinstitute tarring and feathering or something like this, because this is simply intolerable. And we've been through it before, and now they're proposing to do it on a colossal scale. But the main weakness in the pro-war or interventionist argument, or this constant appeal to some kind of macho, schoolyard, infantile sensibility, is that the people who have seized power in Ukraine are Nazis. They are fascists. They are Nazi collaborators. They're friends of Hitler. They're left over from people who should have appeared at Nuremberg or otherwise, right? And of course, after World War II, these Nazi dregs passed into the camp of the CIA, and in particular, this Stepan Bandera, right, went to work for the CIA at Radio Free Europe and that complex in Munich, which I think the complex has moved to Prague in the meantime, but it used to be there for many years. And what Stepan Bandera did this was international terrorism. In other words, he was masterminding assassinations of political and industrial and other leaders in the Ukrainian SSR for a good 10, 12 years after the end of World War II. So again, what you have today is a layer of people who are genocidal, to be sure, typified by this Yatsenyuk, who came to the White House. They're generally, they're generally in business suits. Then you have this Svoboda or Freedom Party, they are the keepers of the grail of Stepan Bandera, and that's this awful Chanibok, who Chanibok has been the object of scholarly works. I mean, he's a case study for scholars interested in European fascism and neo-Nazism in the most recent decade. And this group, the Svoboda, has been condemned by the European Union in one of its forms for being anti-Semite, racist, ultra-nationalist. Nationalism, by the way, in the Russian-speaking area means something much uglier than it might to us, right? Nationalism, maybe not that bad, could even be good. But when you get that in the Russian, Eastern European area, to be a nationalist is generally not a good thing. So you got this Svoboda, and they have a number of ministers in the government. And then the real hooligans, the not in business suit, actual street fighting Nazis of this right sector, and that's where we have a guy called Yarosh, who is on the National Security Council. He's part of the group that oversees the police and the army. And then you've got Muzichko, who has just been liquidated, and a couple of others, right? This is a party, one of their guys, I think his name is Tarashenko, has called, as indeed Svoboda has called, for the nuclear rearmament of Ukraine. So you want to have a clique of fascists and neo-Nazis who would be armed with nuclear weapons. And that's what the State Department is backing. And the idea of it is this awful Victoria Nuland, right? This skank of the State Department with her dirty mouth, right? You remember what she said, blank the European Union, or obscenity verb the European Union. That's her. And at one point she boasted, the United States has invested $5 billion in this neo-Nazi apparatus in Ukraine, which she would call civil society. They're not very civil, though, public diplomacy and so forth. So you're seeing your tax dollars at work. The State Department, believe it or not, have chosen to try to create an anti-Russian opposition in Ukraine using this money. And, of course, what you're now looking at is the second generation of the 2004 color revolution, right, the Orange Revolution, which kicked out one group of, I suppose, kleptocrats, but put in another group of more aggressive kleptocrats who had, from the U.S. point of view, the benefit of being Russophobic, right? And that would be the group that's now represented by this awful Timoshenko woman, right? The one with the blonde braids. Although when she got out of jail, you could see she's not really a blonde.
She's a bottle blonde, apparently. Can I ask you a quick question, though, Webster? Correct me if I'm wrong, because a lot of people are waking up to this history now and they're finding out about this neo-Nazi connection. But correct me if I'm wrong. This is a direct lineage right back to when the Nazis actually invaded Russia and the Soviet Union in 1941. It's an unbroken lineage through the Gehlen organization that was imported, as you say, into the CIA. And the CIA has been working with these people, harboring them, bringing them back to the States, keeping the dream alive, killing Russians with them, some 35,000 estimated by Frank Wisner. And it's straight on through to today. This isn't they just happened to bump into some neo-Nazis in the last couple of years, correct?
No, it is what the CIA used to refer to as the captive nations. Or there was something in the Republican National Committee called the Heritage Group. The leader of that was as an Italian from the P2 Lodge. He was an important guy at the Republican Party side. But basically, it's the Allen Dulles captive nations apparatus. And for Ukraine, a lot of that captive nations apparatus is still there. A lot of the people you see representing, Ukrainian world congresses or national congresses or other organizations with Ukraine in the title. Those are the CIA captive nations people, and this, of course, it's coherent with the entire approach of the CIA and the State Department to Russia, right? Which is, you have to give Putin his due. It's implacable hostility. It's an implacable hostility, which is simply the idea that Russia is the one country that's strong enough to say no. Russia, of course, is unconquered. If you look for unconquered countries in today's world, you come down to Russia, the United States, Great Britain, maybe. The other ones have all been overrun. And there's something special about the spirit of the ones that have not been overrun. And Russia definitely has this. And it seems to me, right now, today, I would like to make the case that Russia is in many ways in the right. Let me just make an excursus into that, if I could. I think people ought to be sympathetic to what Putin is trying to do. If you look at the last 25 years or so, you see something that you don't find in history that much, which is a period of more or less total world domination by a single power. You had it maybe when Spain dominated the world from about 1530 or so until about 1650 or 1660. But there was always some kind of an opposition, right? Be it from the Dutch or from the French or whoever it was. And what you see today, since the fall of the Soviet Union, it was a tragedy. Putin is right. It absolutely was a tragedy because it went too far. It didn't need to go that far in terms of the collapse, right? The Soviet Union could have gotten rid of the Baltic states and some of the Caucasus states, and the rest would have been happy to remain. And there were no movements, right? There were no national liberation or national independence movements. That stuff was all top down. It was all the oligarchs and the nomenclatura in Kiev and in these other Union republics who said, we'll save ourselves by playing the nationalities card. So this went too far. And the result has been, it has brought out the very worst, the absolute worst in the United States, like these neocons.
When it could have brought out the best and said, okay, we're the last one. Let's settle this peacefully and fix it so there are never any more unipolar powers. But let's talk about that when we get back. Webster Tarpley with us. Quick break. We'll be right back with him just after this. All right.